It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. As always, my name is Brian Wilson, and as always, Andy Grabner's name is Andy Grabner, sometimes Andreas Grabner, but only for his mother. Happy New Year, Andy.
Happy New Year. I just wanted to say it's great that we're still doing that show even in 2021, hoping that, knowing that 2020 is behind us and 2021 can only get better. I think so, right?
With a lot of potential. There's a lot of promise on the horizon. So let's keep our fingers crossed that, for everybody. And I think this good point came up a few episodes ago when we were talking about chaos, where when talking about chaos testing, if someone says, oh, that'll never happen, again, just got to reference back to 2020.
Exactly.
Whatever won't happen, COVID, murder wasps, everything, you name it. We have I think there were some vampires somewhere. Who knows? Anyway, we are in a new year, new show. It's, as you mentioned, we've been doing this, I think, since 2015, but it can
I think
be
2016. Wow. Yeah. It's been a while.
And thanks to everyone who's been listening. If anyone is on here who's listened to the first episode and everyone on who has perfect attendance, thank you so very much. We love you all, and we hope we keep entertaining you with our short banter. You know, really quickly, Andy, I got to mention this. I know we try to keep it short. We used to have it a lot longer in the beginning, right? My wife, we were driving home from my mother-in-law's, and she threw on this podcast, and we're listening and talk about banter. 15 minutes in, they hadn't gotten to the topic yet. All they were talking about was things like their audio quality, funnily enough, and just all this other stuff. And I'm like, when does this show start? We're 15 minutes in. So to our guests who we're about to introduce, the reason I bring this up and it's relevant is way back in the early days, we used to go quite a bit longer before we went in, not 15 minutes. Now we're pretty good at getting right to the chase. So speaking of getting to the chase, Andy.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm very honored to have for the inaugural episode in 2021, for the New Year's episode, Tracy Ragan. And hopefully I pronounced the name correctly, because I know there's multiple ways probably how you can spell Ragan. And I'm sure
It is Ragan, and it is quite an honor to be here for the first 2021 podcast. It couldn't be a better way to start the year.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey, Tracy, it's amazing. I have your LinkedIn profile open, and let me just read this out. Creator and CEO of DeployHub, helping DevOps teams simplify microservices at scale, CDF board and DevOps Institute Ambassador. That sounds like you are really busy.
I am really busy, but I've been in a small company for the last 20 plus years, so busy is what you learn.
Yeah. Now, very cool. And we got to know each other through the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation. And I actually think, and I remember when we had a chat a couple of weeks ago, and the invite popped up in my calendar, and then I thought, how did I ended up getting a 15-minute coffee call with her? And then I actually remembered, and I looked back into my emails, and you were basically sending out, it was either on Twitter or email or on Slack, if you want to chat with me, just book a time for a coffee chat, and then let's have a conversation, which I thought was really great, because this started the whole the communication or conversation we now have, and so thank you so much for being so open and available for the community.
Absolutely. It was my goal in 2020, when I realized we were all going to be seeing the world through the Zoom window, to really reach out to folks and start talking about what we're facing, not just in terms of being in quarantine or a pandemic, but what we're facing in terms of new technology. Everybody is starting to talk about cloud native and K8s, and there is certainly a tsunami on the way, and there was no better time to do exactly what I did in 2020, to really start talking to people. And I have probably spoken to, I'd probably say about 500 people over the last year, all in different levels of their journey in Kubernetes. And what better way to really define requirements for an open source project, right?
Yeah.
Yes, so that was my goal.
That is really cool. So just as a let us help me understand, because maybe other people want to follow that same model. You pick a certain time range in a week, or like a certain time slot or time slots, and you put it on a calendar, and people can book the time. Or
Yep, I block out my calendar from 9 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, my time, Mountain Time. And that way I have the afternoons to get work done, and I open up the calendar and I, let everybody know. I, reach out to people I see in LinkedIn. If somebody wants to, follow me on LinkedIn, I immediately send them an invite to say, let's not just follow each other, let's talk.
I've never heard of someone doing that. That's really, really awesome. I think that's the first I've heard of it. Yeah, that's really amazing.
Cool. Hey, now Tracy, I know we both, and I'm sure Brian included, we have one of our favorite topics is kind of thinking and contemplating about what's the future of this discipline that has been around for a while, but it seems it's been stuck a little bit in the old way we did things. And I'm talking about continuous delivery, talking about, I think you actually, this is the first time I heard the term. You said it's time for a continuous delivery V2.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you enlighten us what that means for you? What do you want to achieve?
Well, if you guys started, you started it when you mentioned chaos, right? Earlier in your bantering. And we are entering a phase of chaos engineering. Like it or not, we are. When you think about the real benefit of Kubernetes is the auto scaling and the fault tolerance. And how do you really get that? You get that by decomposing your monolithic applications into functions, microservices. This minute you do that, you create chaos engineering, because you instead have one big monolithic that we sorted out all of the link issues at the earliest state in the development lifecycle, which is at the compile and link step. And we're leaving that to runtime, whether it be in development or QA or production. That link step is being done at runtime. That in essence is chaos. And now, while we have solved the problems of sort of encapsulating from the operating system, once we've broken apart an application and we don't link it, we are exposing ourselves to problems with different versions of different microservices that make up different versions of the applications across many different clusters. It is a huge chaos problem, and one I find fascinating. And that's what we have to think about. We have to really understand what we did when we decided to decompose an application version into independently deployable microservices. What did that mean to the continuous delivery pipeline? And how do we now need to morph from the CD perspective to be able to still have a North Star, still understand what an application version is, and still be able to say, we want to put these new features in version 5.1 of our new application. How do we do that now?
Let me ask you a question, because I want to test my knowledge. I know Andy's probably got a million questions. I can see it now that we can see you, Andy. I can see your gears running. But I do a lot of theoretical, right? I work in pre-sales. I'm not doing implementations. I read about stuff. We talk about stuff. We discuss things with customers. So the one thing that's always tripped me up a little bit has been the idea of service meshes, Istio, for example. And the way I described it recently to somebody, thinking I understand it, was similar to what you're talking about, how in traditional applications, you would define your endpoint, you would have a monolith talking to a monolith, and you had a point and it was done. And if you're using something like Kubernetes, you have to define those endpoints in every single pod, every single container running in there. The idea of a service mesh is you just say, connect to login service, and Istio, or your service mesh, knows what those endpoints of login service and manages all that. Only because you're bringing this up, I just wanted to check, am I getting my understanding of service mesh? Is that the general concept for that?
Yeah, it is. To summarize what service mesh is, it's request routing.
Yeah, okay.
It's pure, but don't even get me started on this conversation. That could be an entire different podcast.
Exactly. No. Yeah. Maybe we'll take you up on that one. Yeah.
But in terms of the continuous delivery pipeline in the future, my prediction is that, and when I first started saying this, when we were able to see people in person, they would say, I'm crazy, or they thought I'm green or something. We have the ability to get rid of dev, test, and prod, because service mesh can do the routing. Now, if we understand, we have one big massive cluster, right? And we put all of our microservices are immutable, so they're all running in there. What's the point of having a different cluster? Why can't we just get service mesh to route to the correct persona, the right version of the application? The only caveat to that is how do you manage multiple, dev, test, and prod databases, which brings me to another really fun conversation, which is mono versus poly databases. So yeah, service mesh is really going to that. Most companies haven't started looking at service mesh, but they will.
Mhm.
I was at a Spinnaker presentation, and they did this beautiful presentation. Then they said, now I'm going to tell you we did something, and don't think we're crazy, because it really solved a lot of problems. He said, we combined our dev and test into one cluster. And I was like, yes, I knew that would happen. So it is beginning. And finally, we will get rid of waterfall. We really have always, we talk about waterfall like we've done it forever. But we talk about agile like we've gotten rid of waterfall, but we still do waterfall. We still, we in agile, you do a small a change to code, you check it out, you compile the whole beast, and you release the whole beast. In microservices, it's the last mile of agile, right? And now we can really start thinking about how to get rid of dev, test, and prod.
And this all ties into CD. Yeah, so I think it might be interesting, actually, Andy, to have some follow-up conversations as well, because I think there's a lot of really cool topics we can get into.
Yeah.
Let's. I just wanted to check that service mesh thing, if that sounded like a little bit what you were talking about, which it sounds like somewhat. But yeah, let's go back to the idea of CD2.
Yeah,
but CD,
I still wanna. There's two comments that I have to your statement. The first statement is Anita Engleder. She, head of our DevOps, or we now call it ACE team. She made a statement about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and where she said the maturity of an organization for her is indirect proportional with the number of environments that you have. So that means the more environments you have, the less mature you are. If you, in the end, you only have one environment that is prod, then you obviously reach the highest level of maturity. On the other side, I gotta say, and we talked with Kelsey Hightower and others, right? If you think about Kubernetes, there's a lot of things changing in these platforms. And the question is, how do we deal with to kind of test the new platform versions, the new versions of things we're depending on? Because if everything runs in prod and you are updating your prod cluster to the latest version of Kubernetes without having the ability to test this somewhere, then you may run into the problem that you're upgrading a Kubernetes cluster and all of a sudden everything falls apart. I mean, and maybe I get this wrong. Maybe there's a better option for doing this, but at least this is one of the few reasons I can also think of not trying to achieve prod only.
Well, we'll see how the industry goes.
Yeah.
We will. And there is a part of that statement that you just described, the maturity level based on environments, that has to do with your ability, your team's ability to do true configuration management. There should never be a guess about it. Now, certainly, if you're making some kind of big update to a cluster, something at the low level, I would say maybe you want to test that in a different cluster, right? But for the majority of, it's the old 80-20%, right? 80% of the code that we have running in a cluster really doesn't change that often. It's 20%.
Yep.
So how do we make the 20% as efficient as possible?
Yep.
And how do we support business agility by allowing code to get out to end users as quickly as possible? How do we deliver innovation all the time? And that is the essence of a microservice, is the ability to do that. So while that 20% is critical and 20% may have to have its own cluster to be tested, I do predict that there will be a time in the future that for the majority of the changes, they will bounce right to production.
Yeah. No, your word in God's ears or whatever. I think there's at least a saying in German. I'm not sure if that translates well into English.
Yeah, no, there's I just actually came across that. I forget what it was on, some show. Oh no! It was it was some political lassery on Twitter.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not even going to mention the names. But yes.
All right. So let's go back to CD version 2. Now, Tracy, we have talked about in our coffee call that we had on we talked about event-driven continuous delivery. I explained to you what we are doing with Captain. Kind of the same story, right? What you are saying, we were breaking up monolithic applications into services and then connecting them through events, but we haven't done that, let's say, evolutionary step in continuous delivery yet. Is it about time, and actually does it solve the problem? And so I would like to get your thoughts on what CD version 2 really looks like, what event-driven plays with, and what's the event-driven concept. I mean, what is CD version 2 for you?
So if we think about microservices, let's just keep it in the context of a microservice, because that is where it really requires the biggest shift in thinking. Not all microservices are equal. We will have microservices that impact lots of applications. We will have microservices that are a front end that impacts only one application. We'll have microservices that are security related, login routines, database access routines, and not all of them are equal.
Mm-hmm.
So why should we continue with a very authoritative workflow process that forces every microservice to go through the same workflow? Now, I think when I first looked at Captain, and I just, this has been some time ago, and I read through it, there is a concept of strategy that came up. And I kept thinking about that. And really what we need is not a CD workflow, but we need CD strategies based on the microservice. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that is through something that's more templated, something that's more event-driven. And we really should be able to create a workflow on the fly or a strategy on the fly. So if we stop thinking about workflows, because workflows really puts us into this very strict kind of, you do something at dev, you do something at test, you do something at prod. But if you think about a proper strategy for a particular microservice that has a particular risk level, then you start thinking in terms of, well, what do I need to really do to get this out? What is the proper strategy for this particular microservice versus another microservice? Which brings us to the idea of, oh, well, if I know the risk level of this particular microservice, we should be able to, on the fly, create a strategy that pushes it through the pipeline that's appropriate for that microservice. Now, whether we do it based on events or some kind of a templating engine. I'm a big fan of Stephen Tirana and his Jenkins templating engine. I think that will save a lot of work for a lot of people who are using Jenkins. I'm a big fan of Captain and how that's, you have a kind of a control plane listener that says these are the events that could be executed, and even Tecton. This is the shift in where we're going. Jenkins X just announced their beta 3.0. completely based on Tecton and the events catalog. So now that we have events, we have this idea, how do we best put them to work? And I feel like shifting from this concept of workflows and start thinking about the proper strategy for the item that we're managing is where we should be. That is, in my mind, that's the essence of CD version 2.
Mm-hmm. And so that means, fascinating, and thanks for that. I took a lot of notes. But so it starts then with the assessment of the risk of a microservice. So you need to put them into different buckets and say, hey, this is a very low risk microservice. You can go to production easily. You can do canary deployment, and then we have a certain model of how we turn on the canary load. But then there might be, hey, this is the login service, and if this one fails, then we have a big problem. So we need to go through a different process or a different strategy. This is how do we assess the risk then? How do we? Is there a way to automate that, or?
There is, we have something now that we can really start leveraging, and it's called machine learning. We have all of this information that we should be pulling back from the production environments to start defining risk level. And it has to do with configuration too. If we go back to that discussion around maturity and configuration, that's what we are focused on at DeployHub, and that's why we're excited. This is sort of an auspicious day for us. This is our first full day for having Ortelius as part of the CD Foundation. And Ortelius is a microservice management tool that tracks microservice, it catalogs them, it tracks their deployment metadata, it can track how if it failed when it went out. So and based on those criteria, we're going to start understanding the criteria to start understanding the risk level of a microservice. And that is the essence of chaos engineering, right? Because we're going to let the data tell us that, not a human. We need the data to return that information, and we need to act upon it. And that acting upon it should start with assessing a risk level or the blast radius. What's the blast radius of this microservice? Maybe it should go to a test environment before it goes right to prod, because I can promise you in some of those, if we think about a strategy for a front end where it's just a drop-down list that's being changed, that strategy might be let the developers test it and push it out to production right away. But if it's a security routine, we probably would want a strategy that might take it through several different steps of testing before it goes out the door. So we have to start allowing the data drive the CD pipeline. We have to have smart CD pipelines. It shouldn't be something that a human decides that we're going to, in a very imperative way, say it has to be pushed through this kind of a workflow, because we're not monolithic anymore.
I think the idea of the data driving these decisions is really, really important, because as you were describing this, my brain initially, it was the first time I'm hearing some of these concepts that you're bringing up here, my brain was already like throwing up barriers, like, and trying to think through them. Because I'm like, obviously, I just can't say, that. Like, let me think about what's making me react this way. And it really came back to, I've been a sales engineer since 2011. So the last time I did performance testing was 2009, 2010-ish, waterfall, no automated deployments, very immature models, right? And I think that's the key here. Very, very immature models. And I remember one time having an argument with the product management team because I wanted to do a performance test on a release. And the developer was like, this is just such a minor thing, doesn't need testing, we're pushing it, it's got to go out. You're not testing it. I'm like, I was always like, we should test everything. As a good performance tester would be, try to make a fight for it. Of course, predictably, went to prod and crashed everything, right? This minor little thing, because it was some stupid mistake they made, right? And that's what got me thinking, like, oh, how do we say this is a not important or a low risk microservice? And I think your answer specifically to the data point being, let the data drive that, not the humans. But also, I think this all relies on the common thing we've been discussing so far about there having to be a maturity model in place before you're doing these things. Right. The reason that one, and the reason why I was resisting the idea initially, is because we were doing an old-fashioned deployment. There was very low maturity. There was, countless times you would deploy from dev to prod to QA. I mean, dev to QA to prod, not dev to prod to QA, with, logging turn on full or debug, stupid things like that, because that wasn't being treated as code. It wasn't being all these manual switches. So just the long point I'm making is, if you look at this and if you drop your guard to look at this and not resist, like I started to think like, okay, if you have a proper maturity model in place and you have your guardrails and you have things automated, like your deployments, probably assuming that's what a lot of what DeployHub helps you with, right, is to automate all these pieces and make sure all the configs are properly set. You remove let's say the stupid risk, the stupid human risk from it. And you're left to just using the data you collect to capture the real risk from the technical point of view, which can help you do this. So yeah, no, I like the idea. Sure, in short, I like the idea. I had some reservations as we were going, but I was like, thought through them, and I just wanted to share because I figure a lot of people probably hearing this might be like, oh, come on. But again, you have to be at a certain level. This is not like I know how to drive, so I'm going to get in a 747 and try to fly it.
And remember, in your example, and by the way, there is such a thing as a prod to test to dev. That's called an emergency release.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of those done on a very regular basis. But in your example, you're thinking in terms of monolithic too.
Exactly.
And monolithic could potentially have a bigger impact because it's monolithic. When you're moving smaller functions out, your risk level actually comes down for that particular deployment. And that is the whole idea of Agile.
Exactly.
So that's why I keep saying we have really achieved Agile's last mile when we think about microservices. And microservices will be deployed all day long. This is not we're going to get into a room and have a meeting about a deployment of a single function. And to discuss it and then to schedule it and have people stamp it. They have no idea what it does anyway, which used to make me crazy in those kind of deployment kind of approval meetings. It's like, you don't know anything about this anyways. Why are you approving it? Trust your developers. And if your developers break it, they need to fix it. And that's the importance of configuration management, having a difference report, understanding what you just did and being able to back it out really quickly or shift from blue to green. We have the skills, we have the tools to be able to make this shift, and it's required. We don't have a way to go back. Microservices has pushed us to a place that we have to rethink and reimagine everything about our CD pipeline and start making it smart and start making it fast so businesses can really achieve the agility that they've always, driven themselves to achieve. They want to be the first one on the market with their new feature. Banking, insurance, all of these heavily, even the securities area, they want those features out today. They don't want to wait. They want to get that stuff out now. I want the vaccine yesterday. That's who we are now as consumers. We want it now.
Tracy, I got a quick question for you then on this. I understand the happy world scenario where we all have microservices, we all can deploy them independently. And that's where we want to get to, obviously with different maybe processes depending on the risk. But in what I've seen also with organizations that are now moving to microservices and they want to push something new out, they always say, well, if we want to have this feature, we need to push these 5 microservices out in this version, because in the end they all encapsulate a value stream or like a value increment. For me, the challenge here is now, do you have any thoughts on how you actually organize this and how you are controlling the rollout of services that should be independent, but really they are not because they are depending on individual versions? How do you do this? Is this through feature flags that you just deploy them and then you turn them on at some point, or how does this work?
Andy, you're very kind to ask that question, to be quite honest. That is the essence of what we're doing with Ortelius. Okay. Think about Ortelius as not a deployment solution. Ortelius is a configuration management solution. So in the Ortelius world, let's just break it down to really basic. A microservice is a component. Applications are a collection of components. And why I use the word component, because it may be something other than a microservice. It could be a Lambda function. I don't really consider that a microservice. So it's a collection of components that can be independently deployed. What we have to be able to do is every time a microservice is updated, it's registered to Quay, it's in Docker, new versions in Docker Hub. We have to be able to grab the details about that and version it. Once that's done, we know that anything that consumes it also has a new version. Now, you brought up another interesting idea, which we're talking about for 2021, and that's what I like to call component sets. So while microservices are supposed to be loosely coupled, they're not always loosely coupled. In fact, we know now that people are writing microservices. They're not an application. They're not the teller application for the bank. They're just a set of microservices that have to be deployed together. That's what we're calling a component set. So what we do is we take that information and we pass that on to tools like Spinnaker or Argo or Helm to actually go off and do the deployment. And we pull back that information and we check that deployment file back into our logs so that it's hermetic and can be redeployed at any point in time. But what you end up with is a central database that shows the differences between 2 releases at a component level or at an application level or at a cluster level. It can show the blast radius of a microservice even before you deploy it. You can say, I'm a microservice developer. I'm going to update this. How many people are actually consuming it? Oh, wow, 15 applications are using this. Maybe I should be a little more careful and notify everybody that is coming across. Or maybe our CD pipeline should be smart enough to say this microservice has been updated. Go look at the configuration data and then re-execute the workflows for all of the testing for all of those applications before it goes out the door. So everybody's had an opportunity to look at it. So it goes back to that statement that you read about the maturity level. It has to do with being able to understand how applications are put together, what their differences are as they get pushed across, and the versions that consume them, and what their blast radius is. So it's back to being able to see the puzzle, the top of the box of the puzzle. What are you building? What does this puzzle really look like? Even though it's logical, we are still building applications, and we still have to be able to see it that way. And that's what the Ortelius open source community, that's the problem set that we're solving.
So by the way, when I asked the question, I had no idea that you were actually releasing Utilius today. So this is not that I do you a favor here. No, not a setup, really. But basically to the listeners now, we tell them that we've recorded this not in the new year, but maybe in the old year if they look up the release date. So damn it.
That's all right. They already probably forgot what we were talking about at the beginning.
So,
go on, Andy.
Now, this is interesting. So we have as you know, with what we do with Captain, we obviously have a very tight integration with monitoring tools, whether it's Prometheus or obviously also Dynatrace. That's where most of us work. And we have a lot of this data, right? Dependency data. We know we have version information. And that was also our thinking, like what can we do with this data? Or which other tools can leverage the data that we have by doing distributed tracing across your microservices and knowing exactly how many users are currently using a particular service that is like 3 levels down, and what's the blast radius if this falls. Also, how often has this component failed in the last month when it was talking to another service in a certain version range, right? We have all this data. So I think we should also, besides this podcast, try to figure out how we can get our data to your tooling.
And it's that kind of combined data that's going to start giving us those risk assessments.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's what we then can push back into that CD version 2, right? To define the strategy for any particular microservice based on the data that says this is the risk of it.
Yeah. And there's
that
also
will be cool.
Yeah, it will be cool. And there's another component that I just learned about last week because I was invited to a hackathon that we had internally. And one of the guys, he was creating a tool. He analyzed so in Dynatrace, we detect problems and also root causes, right, when we detect the problem. And he was basically looking at the problem history of the last month. And he figured out, are there any particular points during the day where more problems occur than other times during the day, and to what are they related to? Is it infrastructure problems? Because let's say every day at 2:00 in the afternoon, some team is doing infrastructure updates. I don't know, right? And then he was looking at it on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a weekly basis. And it's very interesting to also then put this into consideration, because if you know that there's an 80% chance if you want to deploy now that it fails based on historical data, not because of that service, but maybe because something else that you don't have under control, then you can say, you know what, let's move this deployment window a little further out.
Exactly. So if this is the point in time that it's auto scaling, maybe you don't want to deploy it at that point in time.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of cool data that we can then use to influence our automated deployment decisions.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah, I think this is the big area of, I don't want to say needs improvement. I think the ideas are there, but the area that needs implementation. And we talk about this with a lot of our guests who have awesome tools, right, about data sharing and getting data from one tool to another, because there's a lot of tools out there now that can leverage each other's data. And I think there really needs to be a focus on integrating these tools. They all have the APIs, they all have the ingest, they can all process and use them. And there's a ton of potential floating out there to get to those even, deeper maturity models. And I think that's the biggest challenge facing everyone, is actually getting the time and the ability to get those set up. Because just think about when we can get all these things hooked up, right? It's really, really cool conceptually. It's just the struggle of time, right?
Exactly. I mean, I think in the end, every tool vendor wants to get as much data as possible, because the more data you have, obviously, the more magic you can do with it. But still, I think every tool vendor has their specialty field where their AI, their ML, whatever it is, their algorithms, just, based on their based on their history, they can just do certain things. Like, Tracy, you can do probably great things in your tools with the information about deployments and metadata on these deployments. We can do a lot of great things on the Dynatrace side with distributed traces and root cause analysis of problems. So, but you're right. I mean, in the end, we need to figure out a better way to integrate these data streams, to give the right data to the right tools, so that these tools can then make the right decision at the right moment in time.
Yeah, there needs to be a data stream framework.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go. There's your next open source project. The other comment I wanted to make on this is that I love all these ideas, but when I interact with customers in the real world, at least the areas that I'm focusing on, we know that there are no quote unquote unicorns, right? What used to be the unicorn is just someone getting there first and people following. But I do find that there are a lot of people who, there are a lot of companies who then, let's say the unicorn turns into a horse and a lot of people start getting horses. I think there are a lot of companies and organizations out there who buy a large dog and put a saddle on it and call it a horse, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge, because what I run into quite often is a company where their heart's in the right spot, but they half-ass it. Right, because maybe that's all the resources they have. Maybe they have a hard time getting enough talent in there that can actually execute, whatever reasons. Right, they get some of it done, and then everything, when you try to get it to that next level, it all starts to fall apart because they have a really shaky foundation or not a good foundation at all. And to me, that's like, this is, I guess, going more on a philosophical level. How do we overcome that? Because there's a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of really awesome things people can do when they have that maturity model. But I think a lot of people start their journey with a really shaky foundation, and then from there, everything gets exponentially harder to build up. So how do you go back and...
Yeah, it's cultural. These are cultural problems. I'm part of the DevOps Institute, and Jane Grohl always talks about the people of DevOps. And there is a cultural shift that we're facing. And one of the bigger, I think, cultural shifts is upper management allowing teams to fail. Failure has always been has always had negative, connotations to it. But really, if you fail, you've learned how not to do something. And failing fast is the best way to move from a dog to a horse. Because I think a lot of times we only want to, we're timid, and we don't want to completely buy into a process. And so we only just try certain aspects of it. And that's what keeps that saddle on a dog. So when having a upper management who says, yes, we're going to have your back when you fail. I'm a director, and I'm going to make sure that you're protected because you tried something new, you tried something innovative, and the next time we're going to get it right, and it's going to make our lives easier, maybe in 2 months from now, not today. That is the cultural shift that has to happen. Upper management has to have the backs of people who are trying new technologies, because you're right. You can't have, you don't want to put a saddle on a dog.
I just made that up. I don't know if that's a real thing, but I love it.
I don't know either, but it works. It works really well.
But how do you get that upper management? I'm sure you run into this all the time as well with places you're going to. How do you get that upper management to buy in, right? And I don't mean dollars with products. I just mean like to say, yes, we are going to finally commit to this, because that, I think, is always the hardest part, right? A lot of times we talk to the people on the ground doing this stuff and they get it, right? But it's just the limitation. So how do you break through that barrier?
How do you get people to take a vaccination?
True.
I think it's not ignorance, it's being ill-informed.
Yeah. Or scared to take the risk.
Or scared to take the risk because you're ill-informed if you have the information.
True.
Which is why we need to start leveraging all of the data that we have, because there's nothing that upper management loves more than reports, right? Mm-hmm. If we can show them from reports that we can achieve greater things with newer technology, if we inform them, if somebody saying no is just a request for more information.
Interesting.
So how do we constantly provide upper management the information that they need so they can make the right decision? Now, they may be super risk averse, and they're never going to want to move to a microservice environment. But guess what? The developers will do it anyway.
Yeah. They might need another cluster.
Yes, yeah, they'll have their own cluster, and then we have running all this really cool stuff. And then one of the directors will say, "We need to get this to production," and then it's born. So
Yeah.
we have to inform them. We have to understand that they're busy with their day-to-day work, and they're not down in the weeds. So how do we inform them?
Great. Yeah. It's a challenge.
Hey, so kind of trying to wrap this thing up here, and I actually wonder, right? Initially, I thought the title of this episode is going to be CDv2. Now, looking back at my notes, yes, we talked about obviously continuous delivery, but we talked about a much broader topic, or the problem we really want to solve is basically smart. I mean, I think you actually called it earlier somehow, like smarter delivery strategies for modern microservice architectures or something like that. Tracy, I want to actually give it back to you. What would you call this episode? What was the main topic?
Well, we have covered many topics, but I do think that we are talking about how to make this continuous delivery smarter. How do we leverage data? How do we bring all of this information together to stop the human factor of deciding a workflow and instead using the data to create a strategy?
Mm-hmm. You could also, I mean, I just, because we had some political things earlier, you could say how to make continuous delivery great again.
No, don't do that.
I know.
No, don't do that. But it's funny.
Yeah, it is, because you said how to make continuous delivery smarter, and I said how to. Okay.
No, I don't think we got into it as deep as we wanted to. But in summary, though, that's the crux of CD 2.0 that you're saying, right? Is the idea of it being the strategy per microservice as opposed to a workflow.
As opposed, right? Yes, a predefined imperative kind of workflow.
Everything goes through this flow.
We can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
You can't.
And in the end, it is smart automated decisions based on data. So it's data-driven decisions. And what we've been trying to do with Captain is where we try to put SLIs and SLOs at the center of everything we do. So every time we execute an action, we validate it against the data. But I think we talked about this much now in a much broader sense of also using data up front to really put a marker, a tag on a service and say, you are risk level 2. You go here. You're risk level 5. You go here.
Exactly. Before it ever goes out the door, gathering that information so that we could do some smart processing on it. We need to be able to apply that ML to that data. And between the monitoring data and the configuration data, we have a majority of it. We really do. We have quite a bit of it.
And to borrow on Andy's political thing, to maybe go back before Andy's awareness of U.S. politics, we'll go back maybe 15 to 20 years ago and say we'll do some data-driven strategery.
Data-driven strategery.
If for anybody who remembers the strategery one.
I do, but I honestly don't recognize U.S. politics today. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, Tracy, you mentioned a couple of projects today. Utilius and others.
Artilius, or what was the name of it?
Abraham Ortelius was the first map maker. And I often remind people that not only was he the first map, he created the first atlas, world atlas. And how did he do that? He went around to all these cartographers and said, please give me your material. And he assembled one big map. He was the first open source community.
Wow.
Literally.
I would have thought his last name would have been Map.
It's Abraham Ortelius, and so we figured it was a really befitting name.
It is,
because we're basically mapping a Death Star. If you think about a cluster and all the points of light, we are creating, we're mapping that, and we're mapping that before it ever goes out to that cluster. We're saying, if you do this, this is what your cluster is going to look like today.
Sounds like our Smartscape. We also map everything in our Smartscape, but it's for another discussion. Cool. We will definitely make sure, Tracy, to get the links out there to the folks. Is there any knowing that this airs in 2021, early 2021, are there any big events that are coming up that people should be aware of in, let's say, the first quarter of 2021?
Well, in April, I am leading a track for the DevOps Online Summit, which is really cool. He does it through Slack. So certainly, if anybody out there is listening and they would like to submit a talk on any of these topics, I would love to have their feedback. Tracy at DeployHub.com is where you can reach me. So if you want to speak on a Slack-driven DevOps show, it's quite fun. I did it last year. There's a lot of discussion because what he does is he just runs the episode in Slack and then everybody's talking about it afterwards. I think it's a really great platform for doing that. Please reach out.
And also make sure that if you have a chance, sign up for one of your coffee chats. That was
yes.
The greatest. That's really good.
Just send me an email and I'll send you my calendar link and we can, chat away because I learned a lot. I have learned so much from everybody and I really have to thank everybody who's taken me up on those coffee chats in 2020 because I have been able to really pull together a pretty clean roadmap for the Ortelius project.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we can get you back on. I know there were a couple of topics we touched upon early on. Maybe we can get you back to just dive into those more. And if there's anything more, if we want to go in deeper on CD 2.0, more of anything there, I think it'd be great to have you back on. This was great.
Service mesh.
Yes, service mesh, all that. Yeah, I think there's. I can see you becoming a very recurring guest, but we'll try to arrange that. I know you have other work to do as well. Still a little bit, right?
Just a little. Well,
But,
thank you. Thank you so much, both
wonderful.
of you. This has been a pleasure.
Awesome. Andy, any last final words or should I wrap it up?
Just let's make sure that 2021 is going to be an awesome year and we have it all in our hands and wear a mask.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening. If you have any questions or comments for Andy or I, you can reach us at pure_DT on Twitter, or you can send us an old-fashioned email at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. And we will have all of Tracy's links in the show notes, so please make sure to check those out. Thanks everyone for listening and Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.